Good morning, gentlemen. I'm back to another session of my talks with you all. I don't call it a talk, I think it's like two-way traffic between the listeners and me. And today I'm going to talk of something which is of great importance to ex-servicemen, that is OROP. In other words, one rank, one pension. Now, what is this thing? One rank, one pension. It means that the pension of a veteran should be periodically upgraded so that he draws the same pension equivalent to the man who's just retiring. Before I discuss that, I'm going to tell you something about the background of the Indian Army, which was very closely related to OROP. The Indian Army now traces its heritage not to the army of Chandragupta or Ashok or anybody, but to the British Indian Army. The British Indian Army, in other words, is also a derivative of the armed constabulary of the East India Company, which came to India as a trader and later on they occupied the whole country. The Articles of War came up in 1893, that is after the Crown took over India in 1858, and our present laws, Army, Air Force, Navy Act 1950, the inspiration remains the Articles of War of 1893. The Army was the linchpin of the British Raj, and it furthered the power of the British all over the world. The Indian Army was extremely loyal to the British, so loyal that they would do anything, whatever the British told them. They said, kill that man, they'd kill him. Do this, they do it. And of course, the British confined their recruitment to certain classes of people, martial and non-martial. I have no comment on that. That was their way of thinking. They recruited the British, the Sikhs, the Gurkhas, Punjabi Muslims, Baluch, Pathan, etc. Well, part of life, and that was their way of thinking. And as far as they were concerned, they were happy because these people were very loyal to them. And loyalty was to such an extent they helped perpetuate the Raj. They fought in Italy, France, Burma, the Afghan wars. They even fought in China, the Boxer Rebellion, and then they also went and fought in the Boxer Rebellion, the Opium Wars. I mean, they were all over the world. And they never questioned the British. They were well looked after, yes. Now, there's one particular incident I'm going to relate, basically to show my way of thinking as to why I connected to the OROP. In 1919, General Dyer had declared martial law in Amritsar. Despite that, there was a public meeting in Jallianwala Bagh, and General Dyer came there with his troops, which consisted of Indian troops. They were the Baluch, the Rajputs, and the Gurkhas. He ordered them to fire on the crowd, on the unarmed crowd. And what the soldiers did, they fired. Killed about 400, wounded another 1,200. It shows the sense of servility. All these soldiers who were firing, it never struck them that, well, there's only one Englishman in the entire scenario. Why not shoot him dead? It's an illegal order. They never did it. And now we keep on saying British killed so many. Well, they were not British, only one man, he gave the order. What about the others? This servility continued. And in 1947, when India became free, most of the officers of the British Indian Army, which became the Indian Army, they had that British mentality. In any case, none of them was a senior chap. The most senior-most officer was only a brigadier, and he was Karyappa, I think, who later became the chief of the army. But then none of these chaps could pressurize the government on any point. I'll give you an example. Nehru reduced the salaries of the civil servants and the army officers. But he made an exception that those officers who were part of the Indian civil service, their salaries were not reduced, but those officers who had got the King's Commission during the British Raj, their salaries were reduced. Karyappa or anybody couldn't put up anything to the government. Then came Rajendra Singh ji, great man, I like him. But then Nehru abolished the post of Commander-in-Chief, he accepted it. Another great thing which I feel very sad when I bring it out, then there was General Thapar, who was the chief of the army staff in 1962, and this man accepted orders from a joint secretary. Now, what can you say about such a man? You can read about this in that very wonderful book written by Maxwell, India's China War. I think if you have time, you must read this book, and it will show you the type of men who led the Indian army at that time. The top brass could not project anything to the government at any time. That is the point. A very important point here also I'd like to make out, that everybody says Pandit Nehru had no strategic concept, he lost Tibet, he lost Aksai Chin. Yeah, very true. But then I'd like to ask a question, which of the Indian top brass ever put up an appreciation or a service paper to Panditji, look sir, there is a danger on the northern border, please do something about it? Nobody put up anything. They are just happy to continue as they are. That's the fact. And then in 1965, none of the Indian generals advised Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was not a soldier, when they were fighting on the Punjab front, sir, the East Pakistan is up for grabs, let's go and occupy it. We are a great bargaining position as far as Kashmir is concerned. Nothing. So all this just about shows that the top brass couldn't project anything to the government, or they didn't want to. And the same thing happened when in 1973, when General Babur was the army chief, the pensions were rationalized, in the sense civilians' pensions were up from 33 to 50, soldiers' pensions were reduced from 70 to 50. Nobody projected to the government, and it continued for 40 years, and the situation became so bad that some of the soldiers were living on a small pittance of money, and nobody projected to the government that let's do something about it, and that is something nobody can deny. However, there was one man who did come, and he was General Satbir Singh, and he took up the case, started an agitation. Though I didn't agree with his line as the way of thought, hunger strike, relay hunger strike, returning of medals, I don't agree. Medals are something which I have won in the war, I don't like to give them to anybody. I don't believe in relay hunger strike and all. That's not what a Kshatriya warrior will do. But all the same, he brought about awareness, and that is very important. The atmosphere has changed in 2014, and that time when the Congress won at its fag end, Rahul Gandhi did ask the Finance Minister Chidambaram to make a provision for OROP. So 500 crores was sanctioned. It's a very small amount, it got no meaning really. And with the proviso that when we come back to power, we will give the full OROP. Whether they would have done it or not will always remain a question mark, because one fact which cannot be denied is that for 40 years the Congress didn't do anything. So whether they would have done it in 2014 if they had won is a question that's to be answered. At that time, in 2014, there was a committee appointed called the Bhagat Singh Koshari Committee. We went into the nuts and bolts of pension, and perks of the ex-servicemen, and said that, well, among various recommendations which it made, it said pension should be revised every year. Good point. But nobody acted on it. There was an election, and Narendra Modi and the BJP won. It's to the credit of both Modi that he, in an election meeting in Haryana, had promised that he would sanction one rank, one pension. When he came into power, that's the first thing he did. He sanctioned one rank, one pension, but he made certain modification in the Koshari Committee. In place of 1 year, he made it 5 years revision. You may agree with it, not agree with it, but the fact is he did it. And I can say the pensions improved substantially because my own pension was doubled. all credit to Narendra Modi for this, and not to the General Staff or anybody. And of course, some credit must go to Satbir Singh, because he made people aware that soldiers are badly off. At the same time, everybody can crib, we didn't get this, we didn't get that. Fair enough, that's your birthright. But bear in mind that the Indian Army is a privileged force in India, where almost 50% people live below the poverty line. Another 30% children have stunted growth for lack of protein. 51% of the women are anemic. So what the army really requires is reasonable amount of salary to live with self-respect, and that Mr. Modi did it. Nobody can deny that point. That is the situation as it stands. We are now in a very peculiar situation here. The soldiers, some of them not happy, and they'd gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court gave a judgment which has just come a few weeks back. In that judgment, the Supreme Court has upheld the government contention that government is within its right to have a revision every 5 years, and the Supreme Court has also said that nowhere in history everybody draws the same pension. You can agree, not agree. A review petition, I believe, has been filed. Let's see what happens. But at the same time, we must remember that the Kushiari Committee report was just a recommendation. It was not an act of parliament. And the army is such a huge organization which can really call the shots in India, and yet the fact is that they have no say in government policy is a reflection on the top brass of the army. There was a general who went to court on a question of his date of birth and age. I wonder if this man ever thought of going to court for OROP. I mean, it didn't strike him that way, that such a thing should be done. So now we are coming to a situation where the question is, what next? My feeling is that the government has sanctioned at least 80% of what was promised, which itself is a big thing. And the servicemen, the ex-servicemen, have other privileges also, which have percolated down after they retire also. You can project back to the government and say, well, please give us something more, have the revision every 2 years or maybe 3 years or whatever it may be. But this is a discussion, and not by hunger strike and relay strike and returning medals. There's got no meaning. This is not the way a Kshatriya will behave. It is the army top brass, and if anything has to be done, I think the ex-servicemen must pressurize the army chief. He is heading the biggest organized force in the country, and he should have a say. But it doesn't happen that way. That is the fact. The British controlled the army very well, and they went away only when they realized the army is not going to be loyal to them. The Indian army is a very loyal force, and the government must keep up that goodwill of the army. That is my suggestion. At the same time, the servicemen must be thankful to Mr. Narendra Modi for whatever has been sanctioned. Yes, we can ask for the moon, we want more, and maybe at some stage, once the economy improves, something more will come. And that's all I have to say at this moment, gentlemen. I will now say Jai Hind, look after yourself, take care, subscribe to my video. I'd like the ex-servicemen to read through this, listen it, and give me their comments. Thank you, sir. Listen it and give me their comments. Thank you, sir.